Well, in just a little less than an hour from now, President Obama will address the United Nations General Assembly here in New York City. It will be the last time he does so as Commander-in-Chief. His speech comes as a looming terror threat still hangs over the United States following a weekend that saw attacks span 3 states. And as the ceasefire in Syria, as we just showed you, does seem to be crumbling. Foreign Affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan is outside of the UN here in New York, joins us now. And Margaret, again, with regard to the president's remarks today, what specifically can we expect?
Well, in his speech that'll last around 40 minutes, the president will really use this as a swan song to remind the world that he, in his view, has made good on that promise. If you unclench your fist, we will extend our hand. He'll talk about opening up relations with formerly rogue regimes, Cuba, Burma, talk about that nuclear deal with Iran, and he'll say, look at what has happened under my watch as president. Not only have I brought the United States back from the brink of a global financial crisis that really shook the global economy to its core, but also look at the climate change agreement that we just got to broker. He will call on the people here sitting, the leaders sitting there, to implement that deal as quickly as possible. He wants that environmental legacy to really be something that defines him. But really, Josh, there are 2 things that are overshadowing this list of accomplishments, and they are glaring. One of them is the terror attack here in New York, reminding people that that fight against extremism is ongoing. It has not yet been won, and also the bloody, bloody circumstances on the ground in Syria right now. President Obama has failed to successfully broker a diplomatic end to that conflict, and he has staunchly refused to take any military action to force Bashar al-Assad to the table.
And so with regard to the ceasefire, tenuous as it was, that is now all but dashed, obviously it will be a major topic of conversation there as well. We saw the Syrian military essentially declare it over yesterday as they struck that aid convoy. What more then might we expect to hear, not just from President Obama, but other leaders?
Well, you just heard Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, say that Bashar al-Assad, the leader of the Syrian government, has more blood on his hands than anyone else in this conflict, a conflict that involves ISIS, you'll remember, who the U.S. is actually taking military action against. President Obama will call out Iran, call out Russia for their continued military and financial support of the Assad regime. But really, the action on this front is taking place on the sidelines. President Obama won't want to focus too much on this diplomatic failure. John Kerry, his Secretary of State, is working around the clock on the sidelines here, meeting with Russia's foreign minister, his counterpart, to try to put the pieces back together again. But U.S. officials say it's not clear that you can put all of this back together again and get anyone to have any kind of faith in a ceasefire if, as the UN alleges, this war crime was committed of targeting aid workers who were delivering food to a besieged, starving city. So whether you can actually get anyone back to broker a ceasefire, it seems very much in doubt right now.
Now, you mentioned President Obama will also be chairing a summit on the Syrian refugee crisis later today. As you mentioned, the 2 things really hanging over the General Assembly, they were woven together to a degree by Donald Trump yesterday, who, in referring to those terrorist attacks, raised calls once again for profiling. He pointed to the potential flood of refugees as one reason for it. The president is expected to call in on world leaders to open their borders, but he also expects American businesses to play a role here as well. What more can you tell us?
Josh, this is something that President Obama actually feels very passionately about, calling on the world to reach out to the 65 million refugees worldwide. This is more refugees, the biggest refugee crisis that we have seen in 70 years. So that $651 million you just referenced that the White House announced today is coming from the private sector, from companies. Why? Because so many of the countries here at the United Nations have been squeezed or refused to pump more money into efforts to continue to fund the refugee camps, to fund the sort of educational programs, all the things that the president says are needed to prevent those very, very vulnerable people from becoming radicalized. We spoke to one Syrian refugee who said exactly that. if you don't help the most vulnerable, you will push them into the arms of extremists. That sort of argument is something you will likely hear President Obama make today, as he also says this is about American values, but this is also about the responsibility, the moral responsibility of the global community to reach out to these people. If the world is not going to intervene to stop the conflict in Syria that has created 5 million refugees, what we can do is at least help to provide financial aid and provide haven. So he will speak to that, and he will thank some of the countries who have. Remember, the U.S. has only taken in around 10,000 refugees. Germany used to get that in a single day.
Again, the president's remarks set to begin roughly a half an hour from now. Margaret Brennan there at the UN. I know you will be with us afterward to synthesize his remarks. We do appreciate the time.